Mr. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Ray, end of war hypocrisy. Dear Mr. President, do you really believe that the Rocket Man is so genuinely good-natured and will abide by the promises he made to you? Your officers are insisting consistently that his denuke schedule must be presented prior to any peace talk. One can then easily imagine that you do not really trust him, despite your uniquely warm rhetoric. So much so, the patriotic people of the Republic of Korea are deeply appreciative of your strategic dominance. His recent subtle scapegoating of the misfortune against you appears to be a sure turnaround. He may want to toss the ball to your court so skillfully and by innuendos that some of the blindfolded public may be led to believe he has some merits. South Korean rightists think that you have been cheated at his disguised gestures of denuke, and so this time on, you should never, ever be cheated again by the hypocrisy of end-of-war declaration. You have witch hunters in Korea, too. When you made it very clear that the denuke plan should be a condition precedent to the end-of-war talk, the press, mimicking the rebels in the Blue House, said the ending war talk should go abreast with denuke debate. What a subtle twist it is. The special envoys were told to report good news to you, but they merely delivered Rocket Man's calculated regrets on you. They added that you would allow their nerdy boss to go to UN to promote declaration to end the war. Did you really mean to allow him to do so? The South Korean National Security Advisor delivered clear messages in defiance and betrayal to you. He denunciated the priority of FFVD to end-of-war declaration and insisted that the end-of-war declaration is merely a political declaration and may become a moot issue later. He added that declaration to end the war would not necessarily lead to the peace treaty and removal of U.S. Army, that is, that they ought to be viewed as different animals. These sound outright blackmailing, or at a minimum, a bold repudiation of assumptions and promises made to you. Rocket Man's own statement on the denuke of the entire peninsula means that his goal is to destroy all national security system of South Korea, aiming to mislead the entire world and removing U.S. military forces from the peninsula. Majority of commentators agree that the two partners in concert will never, ever give up the nuke, and that you should not be dragged into their poker game but rely on sound military strategies of your loyal officers. Otherwise, they will relentlessly get to where they want, no matter what you may do to discourage them. Kim is expressly not interested in FFVD. So are his puppets in the South. The anti-American attitude of the ranked officers of the fake regime in the South is seen in all four corners of public administration and economic policies. Everything appears to be geared up to unification by communism. If your defense secretary has kept the U.S. Army in the peninsula to prevent the World War III, you should now keep your soldiers in the peninsula to prevent the Korean War too. What are the net effects of the hasty declaration to end the war in the peninsula? In our opinion, it will mean that 1. North Korea will be encouraged to invade and conquer South Korea, 2. The U.S. will not be able to defend South Korea, thus in helpless violation of the Mutual Defense Agreement of 1953, and 3. You will likelier than not lose the war with China. The fake regime in the South have almost completed paving the boulevards for the North to conquer the South, perhaps in less than half a day. Cyber war is already in operation. The moment you allow the war to end, it will be taken advantage of immediately. Remember the Atchison line in the Korean War I, and how difficult it was to fight back and how many lives you lost? What would happen to the Korean War II? You will not have the situation under control. The nerdy puppet on the South avowed his desire to accomplish irreversible communization within this year, including of course, the declaration to end the war. We would also like to remind you that U.S. was a party to the Truce Pact and not the Republic of Korea. What would you mean by ending the war? There are myriads of thorny issues to resolve before you may make sense to talk about the closing of the war. Presumptions and propagandas have been made throughout, each party insisting on its own definitions and interpretations of the acts of war. Who are the war criminals? Who are the victims? Who are the prisoners of war? How can the victims be compensated? Who will define what and how? You would agree on the fundamentals. The fundamental position that the Northern regime has undertaken is that South Korea and 16 UN forces invaded the North. North Koreans deeply believe that Americans made them fight, suffer and lie poorly. You are defined by them, the aggressors, and you will be demanded to compensate for all of their miseries. South Koreans, except for those indoctrinated by the North, believe that the Northern regime broke the war. The fundamental departure will never be resolved, unless and until the two sides fight it out and one has conquered the other. Unification by peaceful means? Forget it, Your Excellency. Contracts and treaties will not be honored, as there can be no meeting of minds ab initio. We all know by now that you are the greatest negotiator and not the rebel leader, by the way. You seem not to remember, however, that people in the peninsula may not have the legal mind that you witness in the States. Judicial systems dysfunction there, not as in the U.S., where at least a legal system is in operation. Savage villains cannot be expected to act like civilized citizens of a judicially sober nation. Please do not forget that you are dealing with the Southerners indoctrinated by the North, not the genuinely good-hearted people of the Republic of Korea, the nation that your predecessors helped establish in 1948. You ought to realize that no dialogues and negotiations will work with the indoctrinated puppets. As soon as the war is declared to be terminated, both regimes will say the nuke is a moot issue, as they would have gotten what they wanted. Naive or innocent, they do not comprehend your rhetoric. They will have their own interpretation of your comments. In the meantime, both economic and human catastrophes will follow in the South. We repeatedly advised you to watch for the blackmailing and maneuvering. The head rebel announced that his advocacy of peace and no war should be progressed to the extent irreversible within the year. The menacing blackmail clearly demonstrates imminent intent and action to turn over the country to the North. We are afraid that you may not have a chance to get the nuke issue resolved after all. Simply, there cannot be, and should not be, a trade-off between FFVD and termination of war. Termination of the Korean War I will be followed by the Korean War II. Your mutual defense agreement covers it, too, but it will be a totally different type of war. Very truly yours.